7. I got promoted. To start with the conclusion. The missing budget had been siphoned from the National Defense Department's Demonic Forest Countermeasures Division. In the first place, the miasma from the demonic forest was said to occur on the scale of centuries, but not exactly every 100 years. There was always some margin of error. Since it had already been 120 years since the previous miasma, and in the last few cycles the Saintis had been within the country or an allied nation, the budget had room to spare. There were even reserves, so a generation that wasn't familiar with the demonic forest had apparently spent freely without thinking much of it. But now, signs of miasma were appearing, and the kingdom poured enormous funds into a high-stakes secret art. That was how they summoned, the Saintis from another world, and along with her, Psykyra as an unwanted bonus. A Saintis budget that should have covered only one person now needed to include a second person's living support because of Psykyra. That said, those were separate matters, and Psykyra had no intention of declining that support. He had been forced to abandon everything he had built, assets, family, friends, and was kidnapped. That money was only fair compensation. More troubling still, it seemed the first prince, who had admired the kingdom's Saintis legend, was showering Yua with gifts. That part was fine. Whether it was love or admiration, he could do as he pleased, so long as it was his own money. But everything given to Yua was billed back to the accounting department as state expenditure under the label Saintis budget. Even without that, the daily costs paid for Yua were 3 times the living stipend Psykyra received. He had no complaints there. That was the gap between a Saintis and an ordinary man. The problem was the mountain of additional charges for jewelry and ornaments on top of it. The prince claimed she needed to experience the kingdom's culture and come to love the country in order to fulfill her role. But his sense of money was royal, so it was excessive. It's fine for now, but if this keeps going and miasma damage starts, it'll be bad. Miasma damage began with plants, next animals, and then it progressed into disease among humans. Once crops were hit, tax collection would drop. The same would be true for livestock. Revenue from animal products would decline. It seemed the high-ranking people all believed taxes would just spring up from the ground no matter what. Running simulations after simulation, Psykyra rubbed at his nails. Perhaps because he'd been forced into involuntary non-smoking since coming to this world, he developed the habit of fidgeting with his nails unconsciously. And there were other problems, too. Why are our third night order requests being rejected? At the second rate of the day, Psykyra released a sigh so quietly it wouldn't be noticed. Even though he thought he was regulating them gently, the previous state had been so lax that complaints like these had increased recently. If he left it to Helmet, it would become nothing but stamping approvals again, so Psykyra went out each time and explained politely, but there were simply too many. Every time, work stopped. Nothing progressed. You're not worth talking to. You lowly underling. Where is Administrator Somalia? Administrator Somalia is currently out. That was a lie. Psykyra had shoved him into an off-schedule lunch break, so he wouldn't be around when complaints arrived. As for Psykyra himself, he was eating a homemade sandwich at his desk while reviewing documents, not going to the cafeteria. Even so, compared to Japan, it was still a more peaceful break. At least no phone calls came in. Then, in the midst of those days, what he had feared became reality. The emergence of miasma was officially confirmed. Reports of crop damage came from the village closest to the demonic forest, and tax revenue projections dropped. Yua, the Saintis, was still training her purification. The first prince and the Saintis faction opposed letting the precious Saintis approach the demonic forest during preparation, and the situation looked likely to drag on. And now the kingdom treasury's razor-thin state was exposed, and the accounting department became the scapegoat. What kind of management is this? What do you mean there's no money? Are you embezzling? The upper ranks of the legal affairs department hammered Helmet one after another, and Helmet trembled, thinking, why is this happening? They had only been doing what they always did, passing budgets as their superiors demanded. Why, in his time, was he the one being blamed? When Helmet trudged back to the accounting office, waiting for him was Psykyra, whose under-eye shadows had started to turn bluish again lately. Administrator Helmet, the documents are ready. At the bundle of papers thrust toward him, Helmet felt sick. This wasn't a situation where normal work could continue. Psykyra was a foreigner from another world, caught up in the Saintis summoning, and yet despite being guaranteed by the kingdom that he would never have to worry about money for life, he had voluntarily come to this accounting department, an oddball. At first, he'd said he didn't understand this world's culture. Helmut had accepted him only because he'd been ordered to. Helmut had expected nothing. And yet, he was useful. For some reason, he willingly worked after hours, and before long he was even screening the documents that would have been passed to Helmut. A hard-working eccentric, whose performance was astonishingly competent. He caused friction with other departments, yes, but he also stepped forward to take the brunt of it himself, which helped. But right now Helmut had neither the mood nor the capacity to indulge that appetite for work. "I'm sorry, but can you leave it for later? There's something I have to deal with first." Refusing as if squeezing the words out, Helmut looked haggard. Saikaira stared back with the same muddy eyes as ever, and offered the documents again. "Yes, that's why. These are the detailed national expenditures for the past 20 years, the categorization of requests for the last year, and the draft budget framework going forward. Please review them before the next meeting and hand them to upper management." Huh. A sound Helmut had never made before slipped out of his mouth. The next day's meeting left the administrators of every department, including legal affairs, turning pale. A revised and detailed report of income and expenditures over the past 20 years, and the actual amounts each department had used. A summary of how much and for what reasons each department had demanded budget requests from accounting over the past year. A re-examination of the current budget breakdown, and a calculated table estimating total damages assuming the miasma crisis to come. They had tried to dump the blame on accounting, thinking there were no high-status people there, and make it all disappear. But now even a red light district expense request from just a week ago was being exposed in full daylight, complete with the establishment's own price list. There was no room to wriggle out. "Was this you?" Directly addressed by Chancellor Kamil Kalvada, an imposing, handsome man with reddish rose-brown hair slicked back, seated at the center of honor in the meeting room. Helmut swallowed his heart, which felt like it might burst, and opened his mouth. And no, it was, therefore. So, as I said, the administrator is currently in a meeting, so I will handle this. I told you you're not worth talking to. Complaints from other departments about budget requests, something that was becoming daily life, made Saikaira want to kick someone across the room. He swallowed it and responded. He knew that if things came down to force, he had no chance. Even if they said Saikaira wasn't worth talking to, it was Saikaira himself who had sent the request back. Though perhaps they meant they wanted a responsible authority. Helmutsen really is in a meeting, you know. Seeing it, Norbert tried to help, but was shouted down. "Shut it, some baron's son." And he flinched. 4 Third Night Order members, it seemed they held more power than many nobles, and more than family, they were inflated by their own strength. "If we allocate any more out of the Third Night Order's budget, we'll have to subtract it from the dormitory's annual miscellaneous expenses." He suggested that if they insisted on more money, they could expect the dormitory's food standards to drop. But of course he was yelled at. "Don't screw with us. We're the Third Night Order. What power does a mere civil clerk even? Then I shall grant him a position." Without raising his voice at all, a low, sweetly resonant tone spread through the room, and both sides froze mid-argument. "Huh." Looking past the large Third Night Order man in front of him, Saikaira saw Helmut, pale-faced, standing with a refined, dignified man in his 40s. The man wore a civil uniform with deep blue cloak, his reddish-golden hair, and the cloak's ornate rank marking making it obvious he was upper leadership. "See, Chancellor." The knight snapped into a crisp salute, and the accounting staff hurried to straighten themselves as well. Only Saikaira couldn't keep up with the sudden shift. "Chancellor, in Japan, that'd be something like the Prime Minister? Even inside the palace. Why would someone like that appear in this backwater department without warning?" No one answered. In the silence, everyone waited for the Chancellor's words, while the Chancellor alone stepped forward with calm authority. As he approached, the knight in front of Saikaira immediately stepped aside, leaving only Saikaira standing there, dumbfounded. It's my first time seeing you up close, but you're not as bad as they say." Before Saikaira could react, the Chancellor leaned in close and murmured quietly enough that only Saikaira could hear, then drew back and turned to the knight again. "This man has no position, and his rank is low. So you think you need not listen to him, yes? Then we shall grant him a post and give him enforcement authority." And no, that's... The knight panicked, and Saikaira panicked even harder. No one had asked him anything, yet it was clearly about him. Please wait, Chancellor. What exactly?" "I will grant you the post of Deputy Accounting Supervisor." Continue as you have, and devote yourself loyally to the kingdom. Voices rustled through the accounting staff, but Saikaira had no room for that. And management. There's no way I can handle a managerial position. No. Management, middle management, at that, means getting dumped on from above and below. I just want to do my own work with no responsibility and no strings attached. In his panic, Saikaira made a mistake. To an outside ear it sounded like humble refusal. The Chancellor, called the kingdom's greatest mind, narrowed his emerald gray eyes. Oh, so you have managerial experience as well. Too late, he realized at the moment he said it. The Chancellor smiled in a way that could be called elegant, wrapped a large hand around Saikaira's shoulder, and whispered with delight. An excellent Shichiku asset. I look forward to your future achievements. As the surrounding people backed away at the Chancellor's unusually good mood, Camille reread the submitted documents once more. The density of information and the quality of writing are impeccable. The forecasts based on evidence are persuasive, and there are multiple counterproposals prepared. To do all of this on his own initiative, without being ordered, what a fine acquisition alongside the Saintess's bonus. Organizing massive data, producing documents to make others understand it, drafting solutions. None of it was easy, and it should have taken time. And Shichiku, was it? To do this after hours voluntarily, without demanding compensation. A capable piece who labors of his own accord. Such a thing. How could I not want it? At the first hum the knights had ever heard from Camille, his guards doubted their ears and went pale.